He made 911 calls from the club during the attack at about 2:30 in the morning, Sunday morning. And there were 3 different calls. During the calls, he said he was doing this for the leader of ISIL, who he named and pledged loyalty to. But he also appeared to claim solidarity with the perpetrators of the Boston Marathon bombing and solidarity with a Florida man who died as a suicide bomber in Syria for Al-Nusra Front, a group in conflict with the so-called Islamic State. But we are highly confident that this killer was radicalized, and at least in some part through the internet.
The FBI director today talking about the investigation into Omar Mateen, the 29-year-old terrorist at the center of all of this. And just in the past few minutes, Peter Doocy talking to a survivor shot 4 times at that nightclub, saying from his hiding place in the bathroom with 30 others, he could hear the terrorist laughing, describing it as a laugh of satisfaction, like, I'm getting done what I came here to do. With that, let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard. Charles Hurt, political columnist for the Washington Times. Ron Fournier, senior political columnist in the National Journal, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Steve, your thoughts on the whole thing, and then specifically on the investigation that the FBI director talked about.
Well, the thing that struck me most today was listening to the 14-minute statement that the president delivered after his briefing. You know, what he said today I thought was better than what he had said in the past, if only because he acknowledged that this obvious terrorist attack was a terrorist attack. But that's really damning with faint praise. I think if you think about some of the other things that the president said, they were at least in tension with one another, if not outright contradictory. He said, for instance, that we didn't know the motivation of the attackers. Said, I think we don't yet know the motivation. He said this today, 36 hours after we learned that at least eyewitnesses said he shouted Allahu Akbar as he carried out the attack. As you heard Director Comey say, he pledged loyalty to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. We know that he had long contact with jihadists in the past. We know
you mentioned the Tsarnaev brothers and the 9/11.
Tsarnaev brothers. We know that he had told people that he wanted to emulate al-Qaeda. We know that he claimed in 2014 in interviews with the FBI that he wanted to be martyred. How in the world is there any question about what his motivations are? It beggars the imagination that the President of the United States could say on national television, even as he allowed that this person did pledge loyalty to ISIS, beggars the imagination that he could say we don't know the motivations. But the second point, real quickly, is that he also said in this same 14-minute statement that we think it was a homegrown attack, that he doesn't have any associations with outside terrorists. Again, how in the world would you know that after 36 hours? I certainly wouldn't point to the FBI investigation as thorough.
Charlie?
Yeah, you know, and the point where he said that there's no clear evidence that this is part of a larger plot. Hello, I mean, all of these things are part of a larger plot. And then for him to actually pivot and within such a short period of time turn it into you know, some way to advance this the partisan political agenda about gun control, where this, I mean, this doesn't have anything to do with that. This is a national security thing.
But it is powerful when they make the point that this guy had been investigated twice by the FBI and yet still didn't send any red flags up. Is it not?
He's still got a gun.
Yeah, but he got the guns, and but he wouldn't have gotten the guns if they had perhaps investigated further, done whatever it took. You know, and it's like this whole argument about the people on the no-fly list. You know, making sure that that's just it's a canard. They're just bringing that up because you know, the problem there is that they're not doing the investigations fully enough, because if they did, then those people would be on lists and not be able to get guns.
To hear the FBI director, Ron, it's like a needle in the haystack, and they have thousands of needles.
Yeah, and we're having a hard time figuring out when the straws turn into a needle. I mean, it is an awfully imprecise, imperfect thing the FBI has to do. They're not going to be able to get all of the bad guys. That's just a fact of the matter. At some point we have to realize that this is a little bit harder than we want to make it believe. We try to oversimplify these things. For example, what are the underlying issues in here? Yes, one of them is Islamic extremism. Also, gun control is an underlying issue here. What do we have to do to get the guns out of some of these people's hands? Mental health is an issue here. It's not just one of these things. Our leaders are kind of giving us false choices. On the president, you're right, he's very tone deaf on these issues, but he did call out today, we have to counter extremism. Now, he didn't say Islamic extremism, but we know what he's talking about. And on the other side, we have Donald Trump, who his first reaction to this, or actually his third tweet, was to give himself a pat on the back. And then he suggested that the President of the United States is somehow involved in the Orlando terrorism. Now, that's, no matter what you think of the President, you don't think he's actually involved in terrorism. And then he ends the day by taking on the Washington Post.
The morning show, he said either he is completely unable to do his job or unqualified, or there's something else.
He said there's something going on here.
Right.
Now, what is he talking about?
I understand what you're saying. We're going to talk about politics in a second. Charles.
But I think there's one thing here that is that the President refuses to understand, and I think it's because of the failure of his policy. The way to defeat and to prevent these things is not gun control, and it is not the FBI investigating. Yes, to some extent that will mitigate it, but in a country of this size with so many people as potential targets of investigation, unless you want to create a police state, there is no way that you can prevent. There's only one way to go after this, and that is the Osama bin Laden theory. And he knew about jihadism, of the strong horse and the weak horse. I think Brit Hume had it right. Ultimately, the only way to decrease recruitment is not with logic, not with argument, not with really clever programmers who know how to do Twitter. It is by defeating the jihadists or showing them in retreat. These movements only grow when they have a sense of inevitability and growth. Once they are in retreat, people stop recruiting. You're not going to die in a suicide attack for a movement that is not advancing. And that means attacking ISIS where it is.
Here is the father, Siddiqui Mateen, and he has previously expressed a loyalty to the Taliban in Afghanistan. He said some interesting things. This is the father on Facebook.
The issue of homosexuality and punishment belongs to God. It does not belong to a servant of Allah, but I am really saddened that he has committed this action.
The longer part of video. The interesting thing was, as even this far into this, that there were people making this case that this was more about a hate crime against homosexuals, and because this guy had expressed problems with that. But the linkage between radical Islam, they want to erase homosexuality, and they throw people from buildings, homosexuals from buildings. Radical Islamists do.
Sure.
So
not only radical Islamists, I mean, you look at certain states in the region, homosexual acts are punished by death, literally punished by death. So yeah, I mean, Britt pointed that out in his commentary. I think there's a huge double standard. You saw this in the email that Hillary Clinton's campaign sent out this afternoon, where she emphasized again and again and again the LGBT issues. She talked about the need to warn off Islamophobia, but didn't talk about the ideology in any detail that motivates.
So yesterday was happening in a vacuum. We also had a guy who was caught with a whole bunch of killing weapons that was heading towards in L.A. I mean, this isn't just in a vacuum. There obviously is a homophobia problem out there, internationally and in the United States. There's nothing wrong with pointing that out.
There's nothing wrong with pointing it out. You can't pick and choose what your issues are. I mean, you read these letters today from Hillary Clinton and from the president from Organizing for America. They're picking and choosing these issues. They're choosing not to talk about
or at least focusing more heavily on one than the other.